The sleek, glass-walled auditorium of Falcon Dynamics buzzed with anticipation. Executives in tailored suits, young engineers clutching notepads, and a half-dozen tech journalists lined the room like vultures waiting to witness a public failure. At the center of the stage stood Nora Blake, 36 years old, wearing a plain white blouse, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers subtly out of place among the high-status crowd. She didn't speak, she didn't smile, she simply stood there, hands tucked into her canvas bag, eyes on the floor. At the far end of the stage, Garrett Thornhill, the company's smug and silver-haired CEO, stepped forward holding a mic with the flair of a performer preparing for a roast. His voice rang out, clear and mocking. "Ladies and gentlemen, this," he gestured toward Nora like she was a misplaced janitor, "is what we've come to. A walk-in applicant with no degree, no credentials, and no resume worth reading, claiming she can fix a problem that stumped our best Ivy League engineers." The audience chuckled, then outright laughed. One engineer muttered, "Is this a joke?" Another leaned in and whispered to his colleague, "She looks like she just stepped out of a bus station." Garrett grinned, theatrically dramatic. "Nora here thinks she can identify the flaw in our X12 pulse engine, a $2.4 million prototype, currently grounded because none of our elite minds could figure out why it stalls mid-cycle." He stepped back and let the silence hang like smoke. Then, with a flourish, he tossed a wrench onto the floor at Nora's feet. It landed with a loud metallic clang that echoed through the hall. "You have 30 minutes, Garrett said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Fix ITA, leave, and don't come back." The room erupted. Laughter, whispers, flashes from journalists' phones. No one tried to hide their enjoyment. This wasn't an evaluation. It was an execution. Nora didn't flinch. She bent down, picked up the wrench, and looked directly at Garrett Thornhill. No fear, just quiet recognition, like she'd seen this show before. In the front row, Cliff Reddington, the company's lead systems engineer, leaned back smugly. "I give her 5 minutes before she asks which side of the engine is the front." Monica Hale, a freshly recruited MIT grad, scoffed loudly. "Why are we even doing this? This is supposed to be a secure R&D division, not a charity stunt." But Nora wasn't listening. Her focus had shifted to the engine at center stage. A beast of technology, sleek, cold, and deadly complex. She stepped toward it slowly, ignoring the murmurs around her. Her hands moved carefully over its Framinot like someone guessing, but like someone remembering. That's when Garrett struck again. "Oh, and one more thing," he said, turning to the audience. "If she fails every single application from an unqualified hopeful like her gets shredded on the spot. We're putting an end to the myth that passion matters more than pedigree." More laughter, a few claps. Nora was officially isolated. And yet, she said nothing. A few feet away, the engine pulsed under dim blue light, hooked into diagnostic terminals. 3 engineers had failed to solve the issue over the last week. It wasn't just a matter of pride anymore, it was the reputation of Falcon Dynamics at stake. And now, it was being handed to a woman whose only listed experience was garage technician and library assistant. People whispered about it all week. Why is she even here? Did someone pull strings? Is this some woke stunt? But no one knew the truth. Not yet. As Nora removed the outer casing of the engine, the crowd leaned in. Even those who had mocked her now stared, curious. Her movements weren't hesitant. They were precise, careful. Like someone who had done this before, but somewhere else. Somewhere important. Backstage, one of the interns quietly hit record on their phone. A hush began to ripple. Subtle, at first. "Wait," someone whispered from the second row. "Did she just isolate the harmonic chamber without a readout?" Cliff Reddington frowned, watching her hands more intently. Something didn't add up. She wasn't guessing. She was scanning, calculating, listening. And then it happened. Nora removed a small valve assembly and held it up to the light. The overhead lamp revealed a subtle hairline fracture, barely visible. She turned it ever so slightly and murmured something under her breath that only the intern behind her could hear. "Still using my stolen design, but someone messed with the ratios." The intern blinked. "Stolen?" At that moment, Garrett's voice rang out again. 15 minutes left. Do you need help identifying which part is the flux chamber, Miss Blake? Or do you want one of our real engineers to walk you through it?" Another round of chuckles. But this time, fewer people joined in. Because something had shifted. Nora had shifted. The room quieted, ever so slightly, not because someone had asked for silence, but because Nora Blake's stillness was starting to unsettle them. Her fingers, though calloused and faintly scarred, moved with hypnotic precision. She worked without gloves, feeling every subtle vibration through the engine's housing. Each motion, each pause, each calibrated twist of her wrench told a silent story, and it was a language few in the room could understand. In the control booth above, Jared Lynn, one of the lead diagnostic analysts, leaned closer to his console. Is anyone watching this?" he muttered into his mic. She just bypassed the primary compression node, without a scope. No response. Everyone was too transfixed. Down on stage, Nora removed the secondary ignition coil, tilted it toward her ear, and listened. Just listened. It was absurd, and yet, somehow logical in her hands. "She's diagnosing it by sound?" one of the interns murmured. Cliff Reddington was now on his feet. He didn't realize it, but his arms had crossed defensively. That's a parlor trick. She probably got lucky. But deep down, even he felt it. Something was off. No one moved that confidently around an active turbine unless they had done it 1,000 times. And no junior tech from a Detroit public library should know how to recalibrate a microvalve with that kind of fluidity. The pressure in the room was shifting. The laughter from earlier now felt forced, uncomfortable. Even Garrett Thornhill, who had been basking in the humiliation just moments ago, now stood a little stiffer, his smug grin beginning to falter. 10 minutes left, he announced, this time without the same theatricality. Meanwhile, Nora wasn't speaking. She wasn't explaining. She simply let her hands do what they'd been aching to do for 5 long years: screet, diagnose, correct. She moved with the restraint of someone who had once worked under protocols far more demanding than Falcon's. And then she did something unexpected. She paused. From her pocket, she pulled out a worn, brass-colored NASA pinthe enamel, faded, its edges smoothed by years of being handled in secret. She rubbed it gently with her thumb, then tucked it back without a word. It was subtle, but Monica Hale saw it. Her eyes narrowed. "Wait," she whispered to the colleague next to her. "Was that a NASA insignia?" "What?" "That pin. She had a NASA pin." "Yeah, so? Could have been from a gift shop." "No," Monica said, suddenly unsure of her footing. "That wasn't the commercial kind. That was something else." She turned back to Nora, a slow realization dawning. The way Nora worked the silence, the mastery, the scars on her right hand, it didn't make sense. Unless... "Hey!" Jared's voice crackled again from the control booth, now more urgent. "She's not just tinkering, she's isolating the harmonic feedback loop. She's tracking a desync in the resonance chamber. None of us even flagged that." Still, Nora didn't look up. She removed a thin graphite interface plate and held it to the light. A near-invisible defect ran along the edge zone that could disrupt airflow under high pressure. She clicked her tongue softly. "It's corrupted," she said quietly. "They copied it, but they didn't understand it." Cliff's face turned pale. That phrase it rang too true. Backstage, the intern who had heard her earlier whispered words now frantically scrolled through his phone. He typed, "Orion engine scandal? Eleanor? NASA?" Nothing yet, but something was nagging at him. Garrett Thornhill was trying to save face. "I suppose your little tricks mean you've found the issue," he called out, forcing a smirk. "Care to enlighten the room, Miss Blake?" Nora didn't answer him directly. She turned toward the audience for the first time. "I need a Modotech digital micromodder and a Fluke 9270 calibration kit," she said. Calm, direct, authoritative. Half the audience gasped. Those tools were only used for precision military-grade testing. Cliff blinked. "Wait, how do you even know those?" Nora was already walking toward the diagnostic terminal, her limp barely noticeable. Her right hand trembled, faintly residual nerve damage from an old injury, but her motions remained controlled. She entered a rapid string of inputs, calling up the engine's diagnostic history, adjusting parameters that only someone intimately familiar with its internal logic would know to look for. "She's rerouting the feed lines," Jared said, almost reverent now. "She's recalibrating the entire compression model, live, with no manual." Silence blanketed the room. Even Moni Casso, recently mocking now, stood rooted to the spot. Cliff turned to Garrett. "Who the hell is she?" But Garrett had gone rigid, his jaw locked, his eyes darted between Nora and the glowing data screens, and for the first time, the CEO of Falcon Dynamics looked genuinely afraid. Because this wasn't someone bluffing. This wasn't a trick. This was a woman who knew the engine better than they did, because she had, in all likelihood, designed it. The room stood on edge. Even the air seemed to still. Nora Blake's fingers danced across the console, inputting calibration codes with eerie precision. Her damaged hand shook slightly, but the movements were unwavering, controlled by memory deeper than muscle. Lines of diagnostic data flowed across the giant screen behind her, cascading in glowing waves of red, turning to green. One by one, parameters once deemed unsolvable fell into place. Combustion balance restored, Jared Lynn announced from the control booth. His voice was stunned. Bypass ratio normalized, turbine harmonic synclocked. Everything's optimal, it's perfect. A collective silence settled, like the moment before a thunderclap. Garrett Thornhill stepped forward. For the first time, his voice lacked theatricality. Who? Who are you? Nora didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up a nearby handheld device, pulled up the RSX-12 engine schematics, and overlaid it with a ghostly image, faint, encrypted, older, a design file. A NASA design file. The watermark in the corner read, Orion Propulsion Engine, 5.3.0 Dr. M. Mitchell, 2019. The crowd gasped audibly. Cliff staggered back. No, that's classified. That's impossible. Nora turned slowly to face them. It's not impossible. It's mine. A collective ripple of confusion ran through the room. Sarah Chen, one of Falcon's high-profile engineers, stood frozen. Wait, Mitchell? But Dr. Eleanor Mitchell disappeared. She died, Nora offered flatly. Got buried in headlines? Labeled a thief? A fraud? She took a step forward. My name is Nora Eleanor Blake Mitchell. 5 years ago, I designed the original Orion engine that Falcon Dynamics now claims as its own. She looked toward Garrett. Or should I say the one you bought illegally through third parties, unaware it was based on stolen research. The blood drained from Garrett's face. But Nora was already typing. She brought up the source code embedded in the RSX-12's diagnostic software. Each section was marked by metadata, one line repeated again and again. Authored by E.M. NASA, 2019. She zoomed in, highlighting the proof. Her initials, embedded inside critical propulsion algorithms, no outside party could replicate unless they had access to the original design. Every core algorithm you've used was mine, she said calmly, and I can prove it. Gasps turned into murmurs. Phones were lifted. Cameras clicked. But then something else happened. From the back row, an elderly journalist slowly rose to his feet, a man with deep-set eyes and a voice that carried weight. My God, he whispered. Dr. Mitchell, I remember you. The youngest chief engineer NASA ever had. You were the one they said would take us to Mars. All heads turned. Nora nodded once, eyes steady. That was the plan before a man I trusted sold out our entire propulsion breakthrough for $50 million and left me to take the fall. The intern from earlier now, wide-eyed, blurted out, Daniel Walsh. Nora turned toward him. Yes, Daniel Walsh, my fiancé, my co-researcher, the man who sold the Orion design to Lockheed Martin, who then funneled it into corporate black channels. And now, here it is. Sitting in your lab, painted in Falcon colors, wrapped in arrogance. Cliff stammered. But if that's true, then this engine is a death trap, Nora cut in. Whoever copied my work didn't understand the physics. The resonance frequency was off by 0.5 Hz. At altitude, that would trigger catastrophic failure within 6 minutes of flight. She walked back to the engine, her voice steady and low. You weren't just wrong, you were dangerous. Garrett's knees gave way slightly. He clutched the edge of the podium like it might save him from drowning. We didn't know, he muttered. We thought someone said it was a clean design you can't prove. Nora held up her phone. This is a legal cease and desist, signed and time-stamped. I've been sitting on it for 5 years. I never filed it because I didn't want revenge, but if this engine flew, people would die. So now, you don't get to pretend you didn't know. Journalists erupted into motion, snapping photos, live streaming. Garrett looked like he might faint. Monica Hale had quietly backed away and lowered her head. Nora turned back to the crowd. You all laughed, mocked me, because I wore old sneakers, because I didn't throw titles around, because you thought brilliance only came dressed in suits with diplomas to match. She rolled up her sleeve. Her arm was scar tissue damage from the explosion that ended her NASA career, burned into memory, literal and figurative. This is what it cost me to build the future, and you treated it like scrap. The room was dead silent. No one moved, and then, finally, Cliff Reddington broke the silence, voice cracking, Dr. Mitchell, what happens now? Nora looked him in the eyes. Now I finish fixing your engine." She picked up her tools again, and in a matter of moments, the RSX-12 roared to life strong, pure, flawless. The sound reverberated through the chamber like thunder echoing off metal. Green lights blinked across every screen. She turned and said just one word. "Done." The engine's low hum reverberated through the auditorium like the final note of a symphony. Every diagnostic screen glowed green. Every doubt had evaporated. And yet, no one clapped. They just stared. The same crowd that had laughed at her, dismissed her, degraded her, they now stood like statues, staring at the woman they had tried to humiliate, the woman who had just saved their company and maybe their lives. Nora Blake stood quietly next to the humming engine, a cloth in her hand, wiping away grease from her scarred palm. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Because this was never about revenge. Garrett Thornhill finally found his voice. He stepped forward slowly, hands trembling at his sides. "Dr. Mitchell, I don't know what to say." Nora turned, expression calm. "Then don't say anything. Just listen." The silence thickened as she moved back to the center of the stage. "I didn't come here today to embarrass you," she said, "or to reclaim titles, or demand apologies. I came because I saw something dangerous, something built from my work, twisted into something reckless, and I couldn't stay silent." She let her gaze sweep the room. "5 years ago, I lost everything. My name, my work, my future. But what hurt most wasn't the betrayal, it was the silence that followed. The people who looked the other way because it was easier than standing for the truth." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to rise. It cut through the air like a scalpel. "I rebuilt my life in that silence. I chose to serve children who still believe in stars. I chose quiet purpose over loud injustice." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper check. "This is my consulting fee," she said, holding it up. $1, the price of a cup of coffee." A few people blinked in confusion. Because excellence shouldn't be about ego or income, it should be about responsibility and saving lives. She stepped forward and handed the check to Garrett, who looked like the paper weighed more than the engine itself. Behind her, Monica Hale stepped out from the shadows, voice trembling. "Dr. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Nora turned gently. "You didn't want to know." Monica nodded, ashamed. Nora placed a hand on the edge of the stage, steadying herself. "This isn't just about me. Look around this room. How many women do you see on your engineering team? How many people didn't make it past your HR filter because their resume wasn't printed on ivory paper?" She pointed to the RSX-12, now running like a dream. "That engine doesn't care about your credentials. Neither should your hiring policy." Cliff Reddington stepped forward, his MIT class ring now feeling like a lead weight on his hand. "Dr. Mitchell, please stay. We'll fix this. We'll give you anything you want, your title, your salary." Nora cut him off, gently, not unkindly. "What you need to fix is your culture, your vision of who gets to build the future. Hiring me won't undo your assumptions, but changing how you look at the next Narathat might." She turned to the crowd, now hushed in humility. "I'm not coming back to this world. I already have a job at a library, where I help little girls build volcanoes out of baking soda and dream of building starships, and no one there asks what school I went to." The elderly journalist who had first recognized her raised his hand weakly. "Dr. Mitchell, what should I write? What should the headline be?" She smiled for the first time all days oft. Worn, real. "Write that I fixed a broken engine, then remind people that I never stopped being who I was. The world just stopped looking." A path opened through the crowd as she stepped off the stage, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder. No one dared block her way. The same people who had scoffed when she entered now parted like water before a ship. As she reached the exit, Garrett Thornhill called out one last time. "I promise, I'll make this right." Nora paused at the threshold, backlit by the grey Detroit light pouring in through the glass doors. "Then start by making room for the ones who don't look like you." She pushed open the door and stepped outside, disappearing into the cold air with quiet finality. Back in the room, chaos reigned. Journalists scrambled. Engineers whispered. Executives argued in hushed tones. Garrett stood alone at the edge of the stage, staring at the engine he thought he owned, now revealed as something borrowed and nearly fatal. Monica sat heavily in a chair, tears streaming down her face. "I pointed at her," she whispered. "I laughed. I didn't even see her." Cliff took off his MIT ring, staring at it like it had turned to rust. He didn't say a word. The elderly journalist scribbled one final line into his notebook. Today, I witnessed the quietest revolution I've ever seen. A woman reclaimed her legacy not by shouting, but by showing. If you were in Nora's place, would you have walked away with grace? Or stayed to rebuild what betrayed you? What does dignity look like to you? True greatness doesn't wear a badge or demand applause. It moves in silence and leaves everything better than it found it.